Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual info session all about the Governor's School for the Arts and our Architecture and Design program. My name is Nick Koval. I'm the director of the program. It's great to be here with you all today. And if you've joined us for one of these before, you know the drill. I like to start off by asking you all, if you're able to, just to pop into the chat feature and say hello to the group, share your name if you're comfortable with that and where you're from. We have the benefit of seeing who all is here, but I'd like for you all to kind of have a sense of who else is in the virtual room as well. So pop into the chat feature and tell the group hi, introduce yourself. Awesome. Hello, Elaine. Hi, Livy. Justin, hello. Abigail, hi. Awesome. I think these messages are just coming to me and the other panelists today, but we've got a lovely group of people here from different parts of the state. So thank you all for joining us. I'm also going to launch a poll just so we can learn a little bit more about you all and who you are and what your level of experience with our application materials so far this fall is. So there's no wrong answers to these questions, but just curious to know if you're a student, a parent, a teacher, if you've had a chance to watch one of our previous virtual info sessions, either a recording of it or in real time, and if you've had a chance to review the applicant guide for architecture and design. Again, totally fine if you haven't, but we're just getting a sense of who's in the room and what you've been connected to so we can customize our conversation today as much as possible. So I'll just leave this up here for a few more seconds. Awesome. Just to share this, looks like we've got some students joining us today. Way to be ambitious and take the reins in your GSA application process. And glad to have a parent, guidance counselor, and educator here as well. Thank you all for supporting young artists. And it's great. A lot of you have seen a virtual info session before and taken a look at the applicant guide. But if you haven't, don't worry. We're going to make sure that you're aware of all the resources available to you beyond today's conversation so you can resource yourself as best as possible. So again, welcome. My name is Nick Kovalt. I'm the director of the Governor's School for the Arts. I'm also an alum of our vocal music program. And if you've been watching our virtual info sessions, you've seen a lot of my face. But I'm really glad today to be joined by a wonderful guest. His name is Mark Richards. He is on our faculty for architecture and design for GSA. He's also an alum of the program. And he's also an adjudicator for architecture and design, meaning he reviews the applications and ultimately helps select, well, he's one of the people who helps select our architecture and design class for the summer program. So Mark, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Mark. I'm actually, like Nick mentioned, an alum of the program, 2004. I worked as an instruction assistant for a few years in college, and then I've been teaching since 2012 at GSA. I grew up in Louisville. I went to the University of Kentucky for architecture. After finishing that degree, I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York for my master's degree. I've been teaching since 2012 a variety of design disciplines, including architecture students, industrial design students, interior design students, and I've been practicing more or less for myself, but I've been coordinating and working with a number of architects, fashion designers, furniture designers, artists, and I spent 10 years in New York. I'm actually located in LA now for the last 2 years.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Glad to be here.
And, Mark, tell us, why you enjoy being a part of this process, adjudicating the GSA applications and selecting the class.
It really comes down to me. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for creatives to grow in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I think that sometimes the national vocabulary of Kentucky doesn't quite do us service. And so coming back and being able to be part of looking at young artists and young creatives, seeing what they can do, propagating their work, and trying to make them feel fulfilled does a lot of good work for us. So it's close to my heart. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for the flow of today's conversation, I'm actually going to lead us through a quick presentation of just an overview of some fast facts about GSA, non-art form specific. This will be a little bit of review if you watched a previous info session. And then we're going to come back to Mark and actually use the applicant guide for architecture and design to have a conversation about what you have to upload in the application, and also what we're looking for and any tips we have for you as applicants. So bear with me for 1 second while I share my screen and we will get started. All right, so once again, welcome to today's session. We're talking all about architecture and design at the Governor's School for the Arts. There will be time for a Q&A at the end of today's presentation, so feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask your questions as you have them. And just to clarify, that's not the chat feature, but rather the Q&A feature. If you just put your questions in there, we'll come back to them at the very end. Before we get started talking about architecture and design today, let's review a few key facts about GSA and how applicants can best resource themselves with information and confidence. So we'll start by talking about the summer program itself. To review, GSA summer program is a 3-week residential program that will take place in 2021 at the University of Kentucky from June 27th until July 17th. Students can attend GSA for one of 9 art forms, and the program is completely tuition free. So while it's too soon to know what the coming months will bring, GSA is currently anticipating the summer program to take place in person, even if there must be additional health and safety protocols to put in place. So you're going to hear Mark and me talk about the summer program today with the assumption that it will be in person, because that's certainly what we're hoping for. All GSA 2021 applicants must complete an online application that is due by the end of day on January 10th, 2021. From there, some applicants will be invited to advance to a second and final round of auditions and reviews. Applicants learn whether they've advanced on February 19th. For those who do advance, their final audition or review will take place on March 19th or 20th. Now, we're still determining whether the final round will take place in person or virtually, and we plan on releasing more information by the finalist announcement on February 19th, so stay tuned. Finally, GSA releases the list of accepted students for GSA 2021 on April 16th, and we also announce a list of alternates for the summer program on that day as well. A few items of note. So students must currently be a sophomore or junior in high school to apply. We will not ask for your GPA, SAT, or ACT score at any time during the process, and you can apply for up to 2 art forms. There is an application fee of $30, or that's $35 total if you end up applying for 2 art forms, but this fee is completely waived by the click of a button in the application for students who qualify for free or reduced lunch. While we are thrilled to speak with you today about GSA's architecture and design program, and we're confident that today's session is going to be helpful, remember that today's session is not going to be 100% comprehensive, and there are many other important resources that you can and should utilize to learn more about the program and the application, all of which are available to you on our website at kentuckygsa.org. Be sure to read the applicant guide for your art forms of interest. We'll review the applicant guide again today as part of today's conversation, but you should take time outside of today to carefully review the document yourself. Finally, remember that today's virtual info session is part of a series of virtual info sessions that you can review or attend this fall. You can review recordings of each info session from October on GSA's website. These include GSA 101, which is an overview of the application process and what to expect in the summer program. Then we had a second webinar where we reviewed the contents of applicant guides, and a third webinar where we actually walked through the GSA application portal step by step to look at what it's like to complete a GSA application. In addition to the art form specific webinars taking place this week and the week after Thanksgiving, all of which are being recorded, so this session is being recorded today, we'll have one final open Q&A virtual info session on December 17th. But remember, you can contact us directly at any time with your specific questions. So you can contact us at gsainfo@kentuckyperformingarts.org. There are no scary adults at GSA waiting to judge you. We love chatting with our applicants, and it's really our pleasure to help you out. And you can follow us on social media as well. So our Facebook and Instagram information is on this slide. Remember, start your application and get your questions asked as soon as possible, nice and early. Remember, the applications due January 10th, GSA is going to be closed intermittently during the holiday season. So, get those questions in before the last minute. Also know that the application portal is likely going to be slow in the final day or two before the application deadline. So we look forward to working with you and answering your questions. And we are standing by now as early as November. There will also, I mentioned that earlier that there will be a Q&A at the end of today's presentation. So again, feel free to ask your questions there. And finally, if you're watching this in real time on Zoom, you will receive a survey after today's info session. Please complete that survey. It's super helpful to us as we assess our ability to recruit across the state of Kentucky. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen for just a moment, and I will pull up the applicant guide for architecture and design, and we will begin our conversation about the program by way of reviewing the applicant guide. So how this is going to work is I'm going to review a portion of it, and then we'll talk to Mark about his thoughts, feedback, and input. Okay, so here we are, the applicant guide for architecture and design. And the first section of this applicant guide is the program description, which is an overview of what it's like to study architecture and design at the GSA summer program. This is probably the one time in the presentation where I'm going to read part of the applicant guide verbatim. So just to review this program description. GSA's architecture and design program introduces students to ideas, processes, and techniques applied in many design fields. The goal of the program is to provide the framework within which students can explore the social, cultural, spatial, environmental, and abstract concepts that affect design. Project assignments focus on developing creative and analytical thought that is adaptable after GSA. Design thinking is introduced through a series of projects which include drawing, sculpture, and model building exercises as part of an iterative process. Projects cross boundaries between traditional and contemporary techniques throughout the program. The studio curriculum is supplemented with discussions, critiques, notable examples, cross-disciplinary works, and field trips, allowing students to observe and discuss architecture and design critically. Student work is curated for a public exhibition on the final day of GSA. So Mark, what else would you like to share with us about what it's like to study architecture and design at the GSA summer program?
Well, Nick, I think the first thing I'd like everyone to know here today, but then also viewing the recording, is to not be afraid of the title architecture, right? We have an opportunity to work with you for 3 weeks to be able to give you insight about what your prospect of becoming a designer at any level is. What we try to do, because you really probably didn't have too much training in quote unquote architecture or another design field, is to just give you the confidence to be able to make your art and be creative in a different way of thinking. And so that's pretty much our goal by the end of the program.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. All right, we will hop back to the applicant guide now. And you'll see that the next section is pretty timely. It's a description of the preliminary round application requirements. So this is a listing of everything that applicants will have to upload into their GSA application by January 10th. So this is what's due by January 10th from all GSA applicants. You'll see we have this list here, A, B, C, D, E, F. This is an overview of each part of the application, and then the rest of this document in this section talks about each of these in more detail. So you'll see for architecture and design, you're submitting 2 recommendation forms, a personal short essay, personal question video, art form specific questions, portfolio images, and portfolio cover sheets. So let's talk about each of those a little bit more. First off, the 2 recommendation forms. There's lots of information in this document and also in our virtual info session about the applicant guides that tells you more about what you have to provide for your recommenders, what you provide to GSA, what your recommenders receive, how to choose your recommenders. But the short story is that you're identifying a school administrator recommender, which is usually going to be like a guidance counselor or an assistant principal who can speak to your abilities as a community member at your school, and then a teacher recommendation, or excuse me, a teacher recommender who can hopefully speak to your artistic abilities, but even if it's not someone who's taught you in the arts, that they can speak to your abilities and contributions as a student and as a learner. So Mark, tell us a little bit about these recommendation forms, how you use them as an adjudicator, and anything you might want students to consider as they reach out to their recommenders.
Yeah, absolutely. So recommendation forms come in a variety, right? So what we hope to find from those letters from your recommenders is a little bit about you, a little bit about your history, your work ethic, and what your experience is, or what their experience is with you. Uh, there are a lot of things that we won't know about you during the process, and what we won't know as educators that they could give us a little bit of insight toward. So it doesn't necessarily have to be really formulaic, again, toward architecture or design, but more about your experience and more about their process through teaching you and learning and being involved, other things of the sort, are really helpful for us to understand while we're looking at the work that you provide us in your portfolio.
That's great. Thank you. And something I always say to applicants as well is you can have a conversation with your recommender about why you think you're a good fit for the program. So feel free to, give them some points to consider.
And Nick, I'll add, if you have an interest that the person who is writing your recommendation doesn't know about, make sure that they're aware of that interest.
Great. All right, I'll pop back over to the applicant guide and we will move along. Again, feel free if you have any questions to pop them in the Q&A feature. So moving along, we've discussed the 2 recommendation forms. Let's go talk about the personal essay and personal question video. So I'm going to scroll down. Like I said, there's lots of information about the recommendations process. So for the GSA application, all students have to submit a personal short essay, which is a written response to an essay prompt. You can see here that that prompt is describe your personal connection to your art form or creative practice. Why and how is it important to you on a personal level? So that's a 250-word max essay response. And then the personal question video is a 90-second max verbal response to the essay prompt that you see down here toward the bottom of my screen. Describe your vision for how your individual artistic work or creative practice can impact others. How do you want to affect others through art, and/or what response do you hope others have to your work? With this video and with any videos you might be submitting, although for architecture and design, generally you're submitting images, know that it's okay to use your smartphone and be in your living room to record this essay response. You do not need to hire a film crew or have any fancy equipment. Definitely make sure that we can see you and that we can hear you and that you are putting your best foot forward. But keep in mind, this is meant to be as accessible as possible, especially right now when so much of us are at home, maybe without connection to the resources we're used to. So Mark, tell us a little bit about these essay responses, what you like to see in them, what students can consider as they start to craft their responses.
So you might hear me say this a lot today, but there's no right or wrong answer in this instance. The most important thing that we like to see from your personal essay and your video is just to see who you are, hear the way that you talk. Not necessarily just speaking, but about what your interest in art is and how you can convey that to us. It's an opportunity for you to reveal your identity, your personality that may not come across from your recommenders or may not come across in your portfolio work.
Beautiful. Authenticity is key. All right. Hopping back into the applicant guide. Moving along, I wanted to point out this section here called Art Form Specific Questions. We won't spend too much time on this today, but this is a part of the application where we're going to ask you a little bit about whether you've been able to take classes in maybe visual art, or maybe even if you've had classes in architecture or design, your specific interests in architecture, maybe you're interested in some pieces of design that you've seen. I want to emphasize that the reason we're asking these questions is simply to learn more about you, your interests, and maybe what you've had access to and what you haven't had access to. We are not asking these questions to get a certain type of profile of a student. No one is going to be disqualified or more qualified for the answers to these questions, but rather it's just going to help us understand you in total context. Maybe there's something that you'll say in these questions that will tell us something about a portfolio piece that we see, or will help us understand just how you are unique in like your journey to this GSA application. So Those those art form specific questions, you'll have access to once you upload your recommender information, and it moves you into the second part of the application. So certainly go check those out, reflect on them, but just know that there's no right or wrong answers again, to echo what Mark said earlier. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say, generally speaking, a lot of what we do with design is that we consider the places we come from, the places we inhabit, the people we've met, and this is going to just be either short answer format or kind of optional question choices. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's an opportunity for you to talk about how you've been able to travel or how you would wish to travel if you had the opportunity to travel. So it's not necessarily us judging you on the ability in that example to have traveled, but might be an opportunity for you to be inquisitive about your traveling. And again, that's not necessarily a question we're going to ask, but just a notion of how it helps for us to understand you as a person and a designer, hopefully.
That's great. And yeah, seeing what these questions are is another great reason to start your application today if you haven't already. So moving along to the portfolio images and or files. So now we're really getting into the more arts-based portion of your application, where we want to see your work and what you've produced. So again, we're going to just briefly overview this. Do take time to review this in more detail. But you'll see that we are asking for you to submit 9 total works, or images of 9 total works, as part of your architecture and design portfolio. So we're going to tell you what we want 5 of those pieces to be in terms of sort of like medium or genre, you might say, I guess, of art. So we're looking for an object study or a still life, a portrait or a self-portrait, an environment or landscape, and then 2 3D pieces made of any material. And again, we're going to have some additional guidelines for you here, and Mark can highlight some of those if he would like to in just a moment. And then your 4 remaining portfolio pieces, long story short, are more up to you in terms of what you want to put out there. So we do provide some additional guidelines there, but we're really interested in seeing what you choose to add to your portfolio for those 4 pieces. And when we look at the criteria section in just a moment, you may want to use this criteria to help you select what those pieces are. And then finally, we ask for a portfolio cover sheet, which really all this is a little bit more information about each piece of work that you're providing: the title, year, dimensions, medium, and a brief description of your process for creating the work. So Mark, tell us a little bit more about what you're looking for in these portfolios, what students might want to consider as they piece them together. And I'll leave the document up. Just let me know if you need me to scroll to anything in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the first 5 pieces that we're going to talk about today. So to be able to compare different students' work, we like to have a little bit of consistency, at least for these first few pieces, to be able to kind of compare and contrast what the kind of background is, what the foundation skills are that are represented. And so these first few pieces are pretty specific, and it's hopefully close to your background as an artist anyway. As Nick had mentioned just previously, and we'll say it again and again, don't do your best to start your application as soon as possible. If you don't have one of these pieces yet, take some time to think about it. Take some time to derive that work and to make it as best as possible for you to present yourself in the best light, right? So these 5 pieces are generally specific in so much as an object study or still life. That could be a drawing or a painting, a portrait or a self-portrait, again, drawing or a painting, an environment, like we said, like I just said a minute ago, drawing or painting. The 2 3D pieces, a lot of students think that they can only supply clay work, right? Because a lot of times when we're young artists, we think of 3D medium and we think of only clay. But think about what you can make that isn't necessarily just clay in some circumstances. It might be using ping pong balls. It might be learning how to weld. Anything that you can use that you think exhibits your best authorship and your best specific voice, we want to see it. We want that to be part of your creative journey anyway. So if you can scroll down just a little bit, Nick, to the first bullet point, I'll just mention really quickly, if you have a self-portrait or a portrait of another person that is 3D, that works. You don't necessarily have to paint a portrait if you work tactilely and if you work through a medium that's three-dimensional or in the round. The four remaining pieces are pieces that you have the ability and the to show your breadth of education and the breadth of your work. That can be photography, that can be digital images, that can be even a video, that can be printed, screen printing, anything that you think works and shows your talent is relevant. Something that I do want to say, and I think this is part may come up later, but we don't need to see architectural projects. If you have architectural work, or you've designed a gazebo for your Eagle Scout project, or if you've done something that's relevant, maybe a reading bench behind your old elementary school, awesome. Include photos of that. Make that one of your pieces for your remaining portfolio pieces. Do your best to show us your best. That's really all that we ask for in those four pieces. The cover sheet, you don't have to get too technical about. We're not too worried about the time period that you produced it. We do like to know the year that you completed it. And of course, titles of work always change, so don't kill yourself over the right verbiage or the kind of coming up with a clever title for a piece. But we do like to see different media, and we like to understand the approximate dimensions. If you take a photograph of a mural that you painted with some of your classmates, take a photograph of that mural, show us that mural, include that as one of your four optional pieces, and tell us about the story. Tell us who you made it with. Tell us what your story behind the project was. I think I can scroll down again, Nick, but I will cover, Nick, if you can just go down to for all portfolio pieces. There's a digital component about uploading just before cover sheet. Sorry, yeah. We've been talking, so we know where everything is in the document. So do your best to present your work as best as possible, right? So take a moment to step back and think about how you can show it the best that you can show it, right? Take digital photographs multiple times of the same piece. Put it on the wall. Take a photograph with a camera at eye line. Do your best to make sure that the lighting shows a color accuracy, or at least as close as possible to what that version of your artwork may be, and do your best to just show that. Now, we don't have to see, or we don't have requirements for technical specifications for what you show us. It doesn't have to be framed. It doesn't necessarily have to be matted. Just be cautious and be careful about what you're doing and what you're showing. We're hopeful, and GSA in general across disciplines is hopeful that this process in your young career as a creative will help you work through application processes, whether those are for college or grants or jobs or employment in the future, whatever it may be. So hopefully this is kind of that stepping stone down that path to kind of just learn how to present your work and learn how to be accurate and show us your best.
It's great. Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot with a question we didn't talk about beforehand. You ready?
I guess so.
I think you're ready. So, some of our applicants might really be seeing that word design and architecture design, and that's really what's causing them to lean in and have interest in this program. For students who maybe have, dabbled with fashion design or costume design or interior design, and maybe have some work in those realms, would you welcome, that type of work in a portfolio?
Absolutely. And I won't even stop there. I say any design field that you feel relevant, or any interest that you feel relevant. It could be technical. If you show us beautiful technical drawings about a brick wall or kind of something that could be kind of mainstay boring, but you have an interest in it. If you have a diagram of a motor that maybe you had this background with your father where you were rebuilding a motorcycle, or a friend of mine from Louisville who built a boat with his dad. If you have those notions that just kind of click for you as a person with a design mind, absolutely. And yes, of course, Nick, if you have graphic design experience, if you have fashion design experience, if you have costuming or scenery or setting for theatrics, include all of it.
And I think we'll repeat it one more time, just because I think it's worth mentioning that your portfolio does not have to have architectural pieces, correct? So if there's a student sitting at home who maybe has a real interest in this field, but maybe has more of what you might consider, pardon the phrase, more like traditional visual art portfolio, you should not be discouraged from applying to architecture and design, because we see that type of work all the time, and we welcome. Correct, Mark?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And I wrote this down to make a note to speak on it later, but my background in high school was an artist. I loved ceramics. I loved making plaster pieces. I loved printing. I took a photography class. I didn't really know exactly what design was. I had this idea in the back of my head that GSA revealed to me, really, that I was a creative person, but I also grew up in a household with an electrical engineer. So my dad being an engineer kind of gave me this kind of antithetical thought process too. But it doesn't have to only be analytical, not antithetical, sorry, analytical. It doesn't have to just be nuts and bolts, structure, spacing, any of that concrete kind of condition, right? Being a designer is about recognizing how to combine a couple of different interests and a couple of different thoughts. So yes, Nick, you should absolutely apply if you have these notions, but you don't have the training, and there's no reason for you to make a model of Abe Lincoln's birth home, or copy a Lego set or anything that you're not comfortable doing. If you're comfortable working in that way, absolutely. If you're not, it won't discredit you or discount you from the potential that we see throughout the application.
That's right. GSA is all about growth and learning new things about your field. So that's what we're all about. Great. Thanks, Mark. All right. So popping back into the applicant guide, moving along, I want to point out that we do have a section in the applicant guide about the final round requirements. So again, this is what you would experience if you were invited into the final round of those in-person auditions and reviews. So this is here if you want to just visualize success and understand what would be asked of you in March if you are named a finalist. Again, just keep in mind that the final round may be virtual this year. We're still figuring that out. But if it does go virtual, it's going to be what you're asked to do in that virtual round is going to be in the spirit of what you read here. So we're going to kind of breeze by it today, but encourage you to take some time to review that if you'd like.
Nick, if I can just really quickly about that, please read it, because if you reference some of there's matting, there's notes about matting or representation or presenting. There's reference about materials or images that you might use to create your own artwork from another artist. Again, a mural or large pieces that you can't bring with you to an in-person interview. It's relevant because we don't necessarily have a different mindset when we're reviewing your work, and you also have the opportunity to show us new work. Other than that, good luck.
That's great. All right, so I've gone in the applicant guide past that section to the next section, which is criteria, which is very important. So to review, criteria is what your application is being scored on. So if you were to see the score sheet that Mark or the other adjudicator for architecture and design, Stephanie, had in front of them, it would look very similar to what you see on your screen right now, except it would have numbers underneath it for scoring. So these are really great tools for you as an applicant to review your portfolio that you're submitting and ask yourself, how is the work I'm showing them reflect each of these things? And perhaps if you're ever struggling to choose between one or two pieces, over another piece or two to add to your portfolio, trying to choose, which one to add, review the criteria and ask yourself, does which of these pieces demonstrates my ability in these criteria stronger, or perhaps does one piece demonstrate your abilities in a criteria area that maybe the rest of your portfolio doesn't as much. So these are your friend. This is not just an FYI on what the judges are looking for. This is a tool and a resource that you should totally use as an applicant. And feel free to involve teachers and family and friends in those conversations too, because we know some of this, maybe new language or new ways of thinking about your work. We totally respect that. So you're going to see each piece of criteria and then a statement about how an ideal applicant exhibits that piece of criteria. So just to briefly review what these are: use of formal art elements, use of design principles and sense of composition, technical skill, craftsmanship and sensitivity to materials or media, originality and creative voice, dedication to art form growth and community. And then you'll see there's another piece of criteria here that's just for the final round, so we won't really worry about that today. Just want to point out the dedication to art form growth and community criteria piece. This is actually the one piece of criteria that's present across all 9 art forms. And this is just us communicating to you that we are really interested in seeing you demonstrate, your passion for your art form in a way that, lets us believe that you're going to be interested in, living, breathing, and eating and sleeping art for 3 weeks of GSA. It's an intense program, so we want to know that you have that hunger for a program like this, that you're, interested in learning and being challenged and growing in your art form. Because if you are the perfect artist in your field and you have nothing else to learn, then this program doesn't have much to offer you. So it might not be the best fit. So we're looking for students interested in that growth. And also, GSA is a community. It's a collaborative community. Everyone has something to offer at GSA. So we're looking for your ability and interest in being a contributing member to the GSA community. So these criteria are not weighted. None of these secretly is more important than the other. In fact, we're really using these criteria to holistically and contextually review each student. So we understand each of you comes from a different walk of life. Maybe you've had access to different resources. You have different strengths, different areas for growth. And so we're going to use these criteria as guideposts in reviewing you and your fit for the program. So I'll stop there. Mark, do you have anything else to add about the criteria?
Yeah, I could just generally say that the first 2 categories, the use of formal elements and use of design principles and sense of composition, are more traditional foundational kind of category, right? So if we look at a piece and we consider how it's framed on a sheet, or what the background versus foreground may look like, or where the horizon line is and how that contributes to the piece in general. The next 2 portions, which are technical skill and craftsmanship, are really about the opportunity for you to understand the nuance of the media that you're working with. So a pencil drawing is dramatically different from sculptural, like a found object collage, right? And so the way that we can use the technical skill and craftsmanship and the sensitivity to material to kind of understand and look at your work is to be able to compare how you're using oil pastels and what success you're using blending techniques, or you're using kind of multi-layers, or if we're talking about, again, mixed media piece and what the components of that mixed media piece may mean between each other and how connections are formed. Is it hot glue? Is it, spun wire? Those sorts of notions let us kind of bridge between a traditional foundational skill and then the next category, which is the originality and your creative voice, kind of paired well with your dedication to artwork, the growth and community. So those 2 categories, we tend to kind of look at your personal growth and the arcing works that you've done and what background you may have and how you've contributed or kind of guided your work by saying being from a rural part of Kentucky and using components from that rural atmosphere or growing up in a different area or a different background and using that compilation of who you are, how you're creating, what's going on. So those are kind of the three general categories: foundation, technical, craftsmanship, and then creativity and voice and dedication.
That's great. And I want to take this moment while we're talking about criteria and the selection process to address something that I always like to be transparent about in GSA presentations, which is that this is a competitive program to get into. And the reason I bring that up is not to discourage anyone or dissuade them from applying, but rather the opposite. The GSA application process is designed to be an educational experience, an empowering experience for students, regardless of whether or not they get into the program. Of course, we all hope that we do get into the program, I know. But on the other side of this application process, you are going to be more prepared for college applications, applications to other programs, and you are going to have learned something about yourself as a person, as a leader, and as an artist. So we really encourage you to apply. There are 256 spots at GSA, 13 for the architecture program. For those 256 spots, we're usually going to see about 1,400 applications. So that's pretty competitive. But we don't have 256 spots because that's how many talented young artists there are in the state of Kentucky. There are many more than that. And every year we have to turn away students that we think are super talented, super promising, and that we hate to turn away. But we just have the number of spots we have due to more boring things like funding and administrative capacity. So for some reason, if this doesn't work out the way that you hope it will, remember that GSA is not a referendum on whether or not you are a talented artist or whether or not you would have a future in the arts. There are lots of artists from Kentucky who are doing amazing things that didn't go to GSA. So I just referenced that to point out that your interest in the arts and your status as a young artist is super amazing, whether or not you go to GSA, and that we hope this application is a tool for you and your future, regardless of whether or not you make it into the program. But we certainly hope that you do, especially since you've shown up today and you're really researching your application process. So Mark, is there anything else you'd like to add in that vein?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, it's relevant for you to be able to be creative and continue that process. And without failure, we won't make growth, right? And so take and put aside any, what's the right word for it? Sorry. If you're not confident in yourself, that's fine. But please make sure that you're trying. And I realize I kind of went off a little bit haywire, but absolutely, it's a competitive process. It's just as much about the strength of the Commonwealth and the strength of your peers as it is about your strength. So do your best to keep pushing yourself, maintain as much confidence as you have and you can. I personally don't have a whole lot of confidence. I don't like speaking in front of people, in case it's not apparent today. But you can continue to make strides along those in-routes, right? And so the stepping stone that I was able to gain from GSA, I have peers and people who I graduated from school with who didn't have exactly the same background that I did, but were able to kind of work together and hold hands across that graduation stage. So it's really just the most beneficial thing that could come from this application process, regardless of your acceptance or not, is finding your creative voice. And so if you can understand your voice, then that will help you at GSA and beyond GSA.
Yeah, and the only way to make sure that you don't get into GSA is by not applying. But so for now, you really do have as much power as possible over the process, putting together your application, and we want you to put together the best application possible. So jumping back to the applicant guide, this is a great segue into the final couple sections. I wanted to point out there is a tip section here. again, these are tips that Mark and I and other folks involved with architecture at GSA put together, customized for this process. So they're based in things that we've seen in the past or things that we hope for in the future. So really take time with these and think about them and review them. And then the final section of the applicant guide is just an overview of the timeline. So if you need a reminder on that, just check that out there. So we're coming to the last couple of questions that we have from Mark. And the reason I'm saying that is I want to encourage you all to add any questions into the Q&A feature if you have them. And we'll be sure to get to those. But Mark, we just looked at the tip section of the applicant guide. Do you have like a top tip or two that you would want to impart to the folks watching today?
I would say start now. Look at what you have that already fulfills requirements. Look at what you have that you want to replace or that you need to work on. And try to have as much fun as possible. Part of what we try to do to find young creatives in Kentucky are to enlighten you and inspire you, right? So there may be questions or terms in the applicant guide that you're not aware of. Look, Google search them. Do your due diligence to research them. See if you can turn an in-class assignment into something that could also be worked on for GSA or bettering your portfolio in the long run. I guess for me, the bottom line is I tend to procrastinate. I procrastinated when I was your age. I still procrastinate at this day, but do your best given it's what, November 17th, March. Like Nick mentioned, if you don't finish an application, there's no opportunity. And I would also say there's a quote that I use sometimes, and I mentioned this to Nick previously in a call that we had. There's a Beastie Boys lyric. It's like the lotto. You got to be in it to win it. So if you don't fulfill or provide us with an application, there's no shot. And we want to see you do well. So we're hopeful that you'll finish the application, that we can look at your work, and that we can be excited to work with you this summer.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. And then one final question for you, because I think we've addressed the one that I would also ask at this time, which is just what would you say to someone who's on the fence about applying? But the final question for you, Mark, before we take some Q&A is, we've got some young artists watching today, or at least some advocates for young artists. And what do you want those young artists to know leaving this webinar today, regardless of whether or not we work with them at GSA?
You matter. I don't know. I think one of the things, again, about design that we do is we incorporate our notion of society of effect, right? When we look at design in the world that we live in, whether that's a courthouse, whether that's your home, whether that's market or other elements, we try our best as designers to better the world. And I'm hopeful that if it's not already instilled in you as a young person, that you can continue that train of thought. Whether you become a teacher, a scientist, mathematician, or an architect, do your best to uplift others and contribute to a better place.
Well, amen. The world needs your artistry. The world needs it. So right now we just have one question, and this is a question about applying in 2 art forms. And Mark, I think I can take half of it, and you can take the second half. So the person has asked, is it okay to use the same recommender for 2 areas? So if you're applying for 2 art forms, you can use the same recommender. And it is also okay to submit the same piece for both areas you're applying for if you feel it really fits. So I'll speak to the recommender part. It is absolutely okay if you're applying for 2 art forms to use the same recommenders, the school administrator and the teacher recommender. In fact, for most people, the school administrator we don't ask that person about your skills as an artist. It's more about, your attendance and disciplinary record and stuff like that. So for a lot of people, it's going to make sense to use the same school administrator recommender for both art forms if you're applying for two. The teacher is really up to you. If you're applying in architecture and design and dance, and you have a visual art teacher and a dance instructor, it's probably going to make sense for you to use, two different teachers for that. But also, if you don't have one of those things and one of those teachers, and you want to use the same teacher, totally fine. So a lot of people might apply for visual art and architecture and design. You'll see that there is some crossover in the application guidelines and criteria for those. So in that case, could definitely see using the same recommender. Mark, how would you address the part in terms of portfolio pieces?
Yeah, and I'll generally follow up that recommender portion. Someone who speaks well about you and someone who has your best interest at heart and can tell us about you, it absolutely makes sense to use the same person as your recommender in that context. I guess, Nick, maybe you can, is the application portal allowable to be able to use multiple recommenders depending on discipline?
The way it works is that your two applications are essentially on the user end completely different. So if you are using the same recommender, you will have to add them in one application and the second application, and that recommender will have to fill out the recommendation for both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry if I didn't pick up on that. I apologize. But so yeah, there you go. You can use the same recommender. You just have to make sure that they fill out both instead of just one. Can you submit the same piece? Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason or there's no restriction for you to not supply the same piece or pieces. Do your best to show your best work. So if you're catering a project to or a piece in a category for another art form, it's totally applicable, and that's why we give you those allowances for other creative pieces. We had a dance dual applicant a few years ago that was both applied for dance and architecture, and she actually took a piece that she had photographed another dancer and made a drawing out of kind of the movement of that dancer, and I thought it was brilliant because she was thinking about space in a way that object experienced space and then made it a piece that was totally applicable, even though the disciplines are quite different.
And I'll also let you all know as the director of this process that if you apply for architecture and design and another art form, let's say visual art, Mark, as the architecture and design person, will never see what you upload for visual art either. So not only are you allowed to do it, Mark will never know whether you did or not as your adjudicator.
Yeah.
So we have a couple other questions here, Mark. First off, if I have an interest, or if an applicant has an interest in architecture, interior design, and fashion design, which is super cool, can I incorporate all three into my portfolio?
Yes.
In fact.
I mean, think about what you're working on in each of those projects, and there may be an opportunity for you to present one creative idea in one project and another creative idea in another project. They're all relevant. It's just a matter of how you work, who you are as an artist, and kind of picking and choosing what those pieces might be and where they fit into the kind of criteria for the application. But yes, you can submit 2 3D pieces in our initial 5 required piece submission, and then the additional pieces you can also submit a 3D piece if you're talking about specifically 3D pieces.
Yeah, and actually, and I don't know if you've seen this or not, Mark, but that segues into a second question from the same person, which is going back to this 5 required portfolio pieces. All right. So this person has asked, do 3 of the 5 have to be drawings, or all their drawings? So just to review, for the 5 required portfolio pieces, and I'm actually going to just share my screen again real quick so we can take a look at this together, everyone. 5 required portfolio pieces: an object study still life, a portrait or self-portrait, an environment, landscape, 2 3D pieces made of any material. So we know that those last 2 pieces are 3D pieces. Mark, talk to us about an object study, a portrait, and an environment. Do those have to be drawings?
No, they don't have to be drawings. They could be our only requirement really, and if you just scroll down a little bit further, digital illustrations and photographs cannot be submitted for those pieces. So if you're taking a landscape or a portrait that's a photograph, don't include that as part of your required initial pieces. If you feel like that work is strong enough to submit a photograph, use that as one of your additional pieces. So it doesn't have to be a drawing necessarily. The only requirement is really, we just don't want it to be created through Photoshop or another digital sketching medium. We would rather have it be from life in that way. Does that?
I think that makes sense. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I'll
Brandon, you can
also
follow up if you need. But
yeah, email us with questions. But I will add, if you are applying for architecture and design and visual art, you say this in the applicant guide. Again, there are a lot of similarities, but some differences in the application guidelines for this two art forms. And I believe one is that in visual art, there are also some required pieces. I believe it's just 3. And I believe some of those do have to be drawings. So it is possible that you might submit, a self-portrait for visual art that is different from the self-portrait that you submit for architecture and design. You do not have to put your best foot forward, and we are interested in the choices that you make, not you, asking us what the right choice is. We're glad to give you some guidelines and some help, but we want to see what the intentional choices that you make about what to include in your portfolio. So. But just note that in visual art may be a little bit different, but what Mark said holds true for architecture and design.
Yeah, absolutely. Visual art is our kind of, our sibling discipline. There are so many overlaps and so many things that make sense to coordinate and discuss between back and forth. And so there's a little bit of nuance, just to reiterate, that Nick was saying, between the visual art application and the architecture and design application. If your best piece happens to be in both, I won't see your visual art application. So put your best piece that you feel coordinates and correlates to your authorship best, because I'd rather see your authorship than a technical category that you think may or may not be the best work that you can present. I realize that's a little bit non-descriptive and maybe a little confusing in the way I said it, but just follow our guidelines for the architecture and design discipline and use any of the pieces that you feel best that fit into those categories.
That's great. Well, thanks, Mark. I think that made total sense. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today. Looks like we don't have any more questions. Thank you again, Mark, for joining us. It's been really fun talking to you today about architecture and design. And thanks to everyone who's attended and for your questions. Again, I can't emphasize enough. We are here for you throughout this process. So please email us if you have any questions, reach out. Don't wait till the last minute to do it, though. And we look forward to supporting you. We think just by virtue of you having interest in this program that you show a lot of great promise. The world needs creative people, it needs artists, it needs creatively talented people. So we know that no matter where you're headed, it's in a place that is that's needed by the world. So we salute you all for your artistry, for your interest in GSA, and we thank you for joining us today. So take care. We look forward to seeing your applications, and we'll talk soon. Bye, Mark.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.